Good evening and welcome to session 3 of our Lent course looking at the book of Revelation. Tonight we are looking at chapters 6, 7 and the first 5 verses of chapter 8, which all detail the 7 seals of the scroll that Jesus, the Lamb of God, stepped up to open in chapters 5. The scroll symbolizes the plan to judge and redeem the world, and each seal needs to be broken before the plan can be seen. Revelation is the vision that John of Patmos saw, and in tonight's chapter the vision is now a nightmare. For 30 minutes I'm going to teach here on Facebook about these chapters, and then we're going to head over to Zoom where we can discuss it. We can discuss what we've made of it as we've read it this week. We've had some great discussions over the last couple of weeks on Zoom. One discussion was about how a lamb can possibly open a scroll without hands. It's hard to visualize, isn't it, in reality? But we need to remember this isn't an account of real life. It's poetry. And we need to remember it's a vision. One way in which I find it quite useful to learn is by teaching and preaching using Harry Potter wherever possible. In the last Harry Potter book, I think we find something that can help us as we grapple with this. Because Harry is talking to Dumbledore in the super clean vision of King's Cross Station. And there we read that Harry says, "Is this real? Or has this all just been happening inside my head?" Dumbledore replies, "Of course it is happening inside your head, Harry. But why on earth should that mean that it is not real?" This revelation is just a vision, pictures flashing in John's mind, but it has real relevance to all of us. Let's just take a look at this nightmare vision. We're going to show now the first 8 verses of chapter 6. Let's take a look. By the way, I'm displaying the readings this week, by the way. Really technologically advanced over here. Let's look at Revelation chapter 6, verses 1 to 8. As I watched, I saw the Lamb open the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. When the Lamb opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature say, "Come." Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. When the Lamb opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures saying, "2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine." When the Lamb opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over 1/4 of the earth to kill by sword, famine and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Okay, so this scroll details God's plan for the story of the world. These 7 seals symbolize what must happen before we get to the happily ever after of the story. As seal 1 is broken, we meet a horse and rider, and we know there's going to be 4 of them because we've read of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and we've maybe read a bit of Zechariah chapter 6 too. But a massively important thing to note here is that these horsemen do not just refer to the apocalypse, the end of time. These four guys aren't just a vision of the future. All four of them are evils that us humans have justified throughout history, even today. Now, a little warning, some of you won't like what I've got to say tonight. I've said before that Revelation is offensive because it challenges how we view the world and heaven. Some of the stuff I say tonight you might not agree with. If so, good. The Bible is designed to get you thinking. Get your thoughts together and come along to Zoom and let's chat about what you think. Let's just start by thinking about this first seal. This seal on the scroll is symbolized by a white horse. Now, our first thought is probably that this is Jesus, right? And indeed, in chapter 19, Jesus is riding a white horse. But we don't think that this character is Jesus. Because, well, first of all, Jesus is unlikely to be part of a foursome. And secondly, these four are bringing destruction. Original readers would have known that the leader of a Roman army returning from victorious battle always rode a white horse. But this doesn't just refer to Rome, because this rider is carrying a bow. And the Roman army tended not to use archers. At least initially, they started to bring them in when they saw that other armies like the Parthians did so to great effect. At the point in which Revelation is written, the Parthians were already beginning to hack away at the edges of the Roman Empire. So this symbolism here is Rome and the Parthians and any future expansionist empire like the British or the French or the Germans or the Americans. The first seal that needs to be broken is imperialism or nationalism, the idea that our country is better than yours. Now on to the second seal. It closely follows. Because the second seal is described as a red horse, that fiery red horse, which symbolises the spirit of war. War is the opposite of creation, and we worship a creator God. But because war is the way that has always been, we tend to try and get around that problem of it being contrary to a creator God. So we tend to think competitively and side with the spirit of that first seal, that our country is better than yours. But war is not a football match. War is evil. I want to share with you a really powerful quote now from Eugene Peterson and his commentary on this passage. He says this: Christ does not sit on the red horse ever. When Jesus said he came to bring not peace but a sword, he was talking of the peace that allows people to vegetate in sins and the sword that separates us from them. No, war is hell. War is evil. We can't read Revelation and think other people need to change. It demands that we think about how we contribute to all these evils, even today. So let's think about ourselves now, shall we? Do we as Christians always denounce war? Or do any of our practices or words go some way towards justifying war or even glorifying war? Do we recognise that God must lament death from war regardless of which side people were fighting on? Is there any chance that as a church we maybe help perpetuate a subconscious thought in the national psyche that we can outcompete anyone because we're great? And then politicians think, why not? And our competitive minds silence the small voice of God that says, because war is evil. Let's maybe chat about that on Zoom, shall we? But first, the third seal. The third seal is symbolized by a black horse. And this black horse is there to represent famine, but not famine caused by natural disaster. Famine caused by greed and poor stewardship. It's a vision of unfair distribution of resources. The poor starve because food is too expensive, while the rich enjoy a luxurious lifestyle. If I made you feel uncomfortable with the chat about war or nationalism, then you really probably are likely to be feeling uncomfortable now. I mean, I feel more uncomfortable about this than anything else. Paul Langham, vicar of Christchurch in Clifton, wrote a book called Understanding Revelation, and in it he makes this comment. It seems to me that the black horse rides very close to home and may even have found stabling among us. On to the fourth horse, the fourth seal. Here we read of a pale horse. The Greek word used for pale actually translates better as a kind of a yellowy green colour, which is what Sophie drew on those pictures of horses that you saw at the beginning. It was a Greek medical term that was used for the colour that people often look just before death. This is symbolic of disease and dying on a massive scale. One possible upside to the COVID-19 pandemic, if we can possibly look for positives, is that a lot more people have woken up to the fact that we are one planet. We are all connected, and sickness in one part of the world, e.g. China, can't be overlooked. Hasn't always been the case, has it? How often has sickness through viruses and bacteria not really made the news or concerned us too much unless it's going on in English-speaking countries? Let's hope we've heeded the warning now. Let's hope we've realised that we can't just vaccinate the wealthy countries. Following this death-warmed-up character is Hades, or Hell. He takes a quarter of the world's population, which, as is often the case in Revelation, is a symbolic number. Not one we are supposed to take literally, but something that we will definitely notice. The rider is accompanied by wild beasts, which probably symbolise the savagery that often accompanies war and famine as civilization breaks down and brutality takes over. And that's the four horsemen that make up the first four seals. Imperialism, the thought that our country is better than yours. War. Economic injustice that can lead to starvation. And disease and huge death. I hope you see from what I've been arguing there that these aren't just a vision of the future, but also the past and the present. But Jesus is breaking the seals here. This is good news. There will always be bad stuff in this life, but this life isn't the only one. Just going to take a moment for you to just think about any questions you might have at the moment. Maybe about war or famine, whatever. Maybe bring them along to Zoom in a bit this evening. Let's look at the fifth and the sixth seals first. So I'm reading from chapter 6, verses 9 through to 16. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained. They called out in a loud voice, How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood? Then each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to wait a little longer until the full number of their fellow servants, their brothers and sisters, were killed just as they had been. I watched as he opened the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to earth as fig drops from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free, hid in caves and among the rocks of the mountain. They called to the mountains and the rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can withstand it?" I warned you it's a nightmare vision tonight. Let's just look at this image, shall we? This image of the martyrs sitting under the altar in heaven as that fifth seal is broken. This is talking about the persecuted church. You'll remember that the whole book of Revelation is written to the persecuted church. And these verses promises us that the early church martyrs were going to be followed by more and more. And of course, we see plenty of Christian persecution today. These verses should wake us up from the comfort of the UK to realise there have always been Christians persecuted. There are now and there will be in the future. Now, what does the altar that they're under symbolise? What does that altar represent? Well, sacrifice, definitely, but also justice and judgment. When we come to the altar, when we come to share communion, justice and judgment are in our minds, or should be. Justice for those who come to Christ, and judgment for those who prevent people from doing so or refuse to do so. That's the fifth seal. But then the sixth seal is broken. And then at this point we hear of convulsions in the cosmos. In Matthew 24, Jesus gives us a kind of a trailer for the book of Revelation, really. He says he will return amidst earthquakes and cosmic distress. At that time, nobody will be safe. In verse 16, everybody is scuttling around for cover that doesn't exist. Your status means nothing. Eventually, everybody is equal. And we get this crucial question: who can stand? Verse 16 talks of the wrath of the Lamb. How can a lamb be wrathful? How can one who gave his life for everyone be wrathful? Maybe at the imbalanced society we humans have created. Maybe there's wrath at the inequality we see in this life. Just going to take a moment as you consider those two seals and think of any questions you might want to bring later. Right now, though, we're going to read of the interlude between seals 6 and 7. I'm going to read from chapter 7 right now. So I'm reading from chapter 7, verses 1 to 3, and then I'm going to jump to verse 9, and then I'm going to jump to verse 14. After this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth to prevent any wind from blowing on the land or on the sea or on the tree. Then I saw another angel coming up from the east, having the seal of the living God. He called out in a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm the land and the sea. Do not harm the land or the sea or the trees until we put a seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God. After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. These are they who have come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So as I say, we now get a little interlude between the breaking of the 6 seals in chapters 6 and the 7th in chapter 8. Apologies, I had to truncate it for time reasons. In this interlude, we get an answer to the question, who can stand? And here we move from a nightmare vision to a heavenly dream. We see 4 angels at the 4 corners of the earth. They symbolize the 4 horsemen again, but now they are being held back, not riding forwards. They are held back so God can seal his servants. A seal was a sign of ownership and authentication, and something that could not be broken by outsiders. The question is, of course, who are these servants? There are 144,000 of them. Religious movements have developed around amassing this number of followers. Most famously, the Jehovah's Witnesses talk about amassing 144,000 people who will reign in heaven with God. We can talk more about the makeup of that 144,000 if you like on Zoom later, but for now I'll just say that it's probably just symbolic again. The number 12 in Revelation is symbolic of God's people throughout history who stand firm. And that's a lot of God's people. So 12 times 12,000 symbolises that quite well. And 144,000 is then just referred to as a great multitude a few verses later. This multitude wear white robes, which symbolises forgiveness. And verse 14 says they come out of the great tribulation. That doesn't mean that they've escaped the bad stuff. They don't escape it in some sort of rapture that you might have heard of. They've gone through trouble and come out the other side. The trouble symbolised by those seals affects us all. This is a promise that with God we can come through trouble. Anyone with kids will know what I'm saying when I'm saying that the trouble's there. You can't go over it, you can't go under it, you can't go round it, you've got to go through it. But you can come out the other side with God. I'm not saying the kids are trouble, by the way, I'm just saying you might know the kids' book that I've just referenced. Anyway, we can come out the other side of the trouble, but we don't get there until we've gone through the 7th of these seals. So let's read about it now. I'm now going to read from chapter 8, verses 1 to 5, which talks about this 7th seal. When he opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. And I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. Another angel who had a golden censer came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all God's people on the golden altar in front of the throne. The smoke of the incense, together with the prayers of God's people, went up before God from the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and hurled it on the earth. And there came peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. Okay. Now this is kind of a strange one, isn't it? Because there's been non-stop noise up until this point. As I make noise in my own room. There's been non-stop noise up into this point. There's been worship in heaven. There's been screams of terror on earth. But now there is half an hour of silence. It's a strange duration. I'm not entirely sure what it symbolises. It maybe just denotes a concentrated time for getting a job done, but not an absolute age. The silence is so that prayers can be heard. Prayer is the bridge between heaven and earth here. And that bridge works both ways. We cry out to God from earth and we see God's perspective from heaven. The silence is broken as the prayers are thrown back to earth in the form of fire, as well as thunder, earthquakes, etc. It sounds kind of menacing and vengeful, doesn't it? Until we remember how God answered Elijah's prayers in 1 Kings chapter 18. God sent fire to show that he was the only God that could hear and answer prayers, the only God with any power to respond. We'll see the full impact of the opening of the seventh seal next week, as we read about those bowls with incense and as we read about those trumpets as well. Next week, we're going to read about a vision of yet more trouble. And this is the week where I'm going to set you the biggest homework, I'm afraid. If you can, don't worry if you can't, but if you can, try to read chapter 8, verse 6, all the way through to chapter 11, verse 19. And then just for fun, read chapters 15 and 16 too. Join me on Zoom for a discussion this evening. But for our feed on Facebook now, I'm going to close in the style of Crime Watch and remind you we've seen some scary stuff tonight, some scary dark visions today, but the light of God always overcomes the darkness. So please don't have nightmares. Sleep well and join us next week. Good evening.